Welcome to episode 7, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for tuning in. Now, as the French army advances, they leave behind stragglers, sick soldiers, and those who can't keep up. These men are quickly captured by the Russians, and the fate of the prisoners varies. Those fortunate enough to be handed over to the regular Russian army are escorted east to prevent them from returning to the fight. But for others, the situation is far worse. Stripped of everything, they are left at the mercy of local villages, and where many are sentenced to death. Shocked by these brutal practices, Tsar Alexander takes action. He orders that soldiers and peasants who turn prisoners over to proper civil authorities will be rewarded. However, the French are not free from committing similar acts. In Smolensk, for instance, 600 Russian prisoners deemed unfit for the march were executed. As the situation worsens, Alexander grows more impatient. He senses that the end is near, and the time to strike is now. The Berezina River presents a key opportunity, and he orders his forces to capture Napoleon. The river becomes a crucial obstacle in Napoleon's campaign, one that will shape the outcome of the retreat. Kutuzov, determined to take advantage of the situation, plans to use the Berezina to encircle Napoleon and deliver a decisive blow. The French army, coming from Moscow, approaches the river, hoping to cross at a bridge in Borisov. On Napoleon's orders, Marshal Oudinot attacks Borisov and captures the city with little difficulty. However, the Russians have already set fire to the bridge, rendering it useless. Oudinot quickly orders his men to find another way to cross. Despite heavy snow, one of his units, led by Corbineau, is lucky. On the far side of the river, they meet a farmer who has waded across the water up to his chest. From him, they learn of a ford nearby, close to the village of Studianka, just 13 kilometers north of Borisov. But Napoleon is not the only one who sees the strategic importance of the Borisov crossing. Chichagov, with 30,000 men and 100 cannons, defends the left bank of the Berezina. Meanwhile, Kutuzov, with 80,000 men, attacks the rear guard of the French army and orders General Liechtenstein to complete the encirclement with an additional 30,000 men. Napoleon, however, has anticipated this move. During the campaign, the French army had devised a clever strategy. The troops moved discreetly to mislead the Russians, and 2 bridges were built to cross the Berezina, one for artillery and vehicles to be pulled by animals, and the other for infantry and cavalry. These bridges were built under the watchful eyes of the Russian forces, giving the impression that they would be the main crossing points for the French army. The French had no intention of using the bridges they had built to cross the Berezina, while the Russians expected Napoleon's forces to move across the Borisov bridge. The French had a different plan. Instead of using the obvious route, they would cross at Studianka, a location far from where the Russians were watching. The deception, making the Russian believe the bridges were the main crossing points, caused them to concentrate their efforts in the wrong place, allowing the French to advance without interference. The strategic move was designed to mislead the enemy, enabling the French to outmaneuver the Russians by crossing the river at an unexpected point and continuing their retreat with greater freedom. Despite the seemingly hopeless situation of his army, Napoleon remained calm and confident. Where others would have been destroyed by despair, he remained steadfast, believing that no misfortune could defeat him. Napoleon's plan worked flawlessly. After the French recaptured Borisov, he ordered the construction of several visible structures to give the impression that he would cross there. But at night, with all fires extinguished, the discreetly he discreetly began to move his men along the path of the sappers, led by Ablé, who were building the two crucial bridges at Studianka. Sappers were soldiers who specialized in tasks related to engineering, particularly in military operations. If Napoleon's army couldn't cross the Berezina, it would face certain defeat. The fate of France was at stake, and Napoleon made several trips to the riverbank to observe the Russian camps across the river. The many fires in the Russian camp reassured him that his plan was working. The Russians believed the main crossing point was at Borisov, even though Studianka was only 2 hours away. For a trained army, the risk of being attacked during the crossing was real, but the plan seemed to be proceeding smoothly. The right bank of the Berezina at Studianka had to be secured. Napoleon ordered General Corbineau and his 50 cavalrymen to cross the river, each carrying a soldier on horseback. Using makeshift rafts, 400 additional soldiers joined them. Meanwhile, small Russian forces under the orders of General Kamilov were relentlessly bombarded by 50 cannons and under Napoleon's direct command. The right bank was quickly cleared and the French continued their retreat. 2 hours later, the soldiers began setting up the chevaux de frise, or known as spiked barriers, on the riverbank. General Ablé leads by example, plunging into the icy water first. Behind him, the brave sappers stripped off their clothes and they start their dangerous work. The river is filled with massive blocks of ice as sharp as blades, but they continue despite the peril. The water soon reaches their backs, and many of the sappers were swept away by the current and drowned. They are quickly replaced by others determined to finish the task. By late morning, the first infantry bridge is completed. By 1 p.m., Oudinot's troop begin crossing urgently, reinforcing the right bank. The bridge shakes under their weight as they hurry across. By 4 p.m., the second bridge is finished, positioned just to the right of the first one. By evening, nearly 10,000 soldiers have crossed and reached the right bank. As night falls, they push on, taking advantage of the dark. Vehicles and cannons begin to cross, and the bridge collapses 3 times under the weight. The heroic sappers return to the waters to repair the damages, with temperatures dropping to 30 degrees below zero, of course, Celsius. They work quickly and manage to restore the bridge in less than 3 hours. Napoleon and his staff don't cross until later, but they continue to encourage the steady flow of soldiers across. Napoleon has given strict orders. Only armed troops in formation are allowed to cross. Stragglers, suppliers, and civilians are turned away. After days of solitary marching, Sergeant Bourgogne finally finds other survivors and joins the stragglers who have been waiting since the night before to cross the bridge. One witness describes the scene. Those who had entered Russia to fight against barbarism and bring civilization are now nothing but wrecks, pathetic ghosts. On the night of November 27, almost no one attempts to cross the bridge. The way is clear, and Bourgogne, exhausted and feverish, falls asleep near a warm fire. At dawn, he is jolted awake by cannon fire. He realizes that to survive, he must cross the bridge. It's better to die from a cannonball than from cold or hunger, he thinks. At 7 a.m., completely alone, Sergeant Bourgogne gets up, takes his weapons, and quietly heads toward the bridge without telling anyone. His limbs are frozen, and his bones feel as fragile as glass, making it painfully difficult to walk. From his diary, I saw women endure these sufferings with admirable courage. Some of them made certain men ashamed, as they could not bear adversity with such strength and resignation. Bourgogne crosses the Berezina on a completely deserted bridge. Once on the other side, to my right, was a large wooden barrack. That was where the emperor had slept, and he was still inside. Bourgogne reaches the right bank and joins his comrades, but he doesn't know that in just 2 hours, a new nightmare will begin. On the same bank, General Chichagov, leading 27,000 men, is advancing against Oudinot's corps, and a fierce battle erupts, and Oudinot must desperately hold the right bank, a critical position. Meanwhile, on the left bank, General Liechtenstein, with 40,000 soldiers, attacks the 10,000 men of Marshal Victor, the rear guard stationed near Studianka. The Napoleonic army is now trapped in a pincer movement. Panic sweeps the left bank, and amid the chaos of cannon fire and fighting, thousands of stragglers and civilians who have been waiting for 2 days rush in confusion toward the ramps leading to the bridges. Men, women, and children are killed by cannon fire, trampled by horses, or fall into the icy slopes. Baron Larrey, the surgeon of the Grande Armée, recalls everyone was seized with terror. The strongest struck down the weakest, who was trampled by the crowd. From all sides, only screams and moans could be heard. Some managed to cross by swimming, others drowned or got caught in the ice. The fighting rages on until 11 p.m., with constant cannon fire and gunshots amid a fierce snowstorm. After a grueling day and many casualties, the Russian forces are finally pushed back, and both banks of the Berezina are back in French hands. At the Berezina, Napoleon makes the only decision he can. He wants to save his army and continue the campaign. The stragglers have refused to cross the bridges during the night, and the Russians are closing in. Napoleon orders the bridges to be set on fire. At night, General Ablaye resumes his mission, urging the survivors from the left bank to cross the last bridge. Ablaye is a remarkable man, devoted to his cause and deeply loyal to Napoleon, but also profoundly human. When Napoleon orders him to burn the bridges, Ablaye understands the full weight of the decision. He knows it will leave thousands of people vulnerable to the violence of the Cossacks. As the Cossacks approach, Ablaye carries out the order with a heavy heart, and the moment the first flames rise, chaos erupts. People scramble from all sides to cross the bridges, creating a disorganized, panicked crowd. Around 12,000 stragglers and civilians along 3,000 soldiers fight to survive. From the safety of the right bank, the scene on the left is one of horror and suffering. The crowd is caught between two dangers, the advancing Cossacks and the fire. Trapped at the crossing points, the bridges collapse. Under the weight of the desperate masses, men, women, and children are either consumed by the flames or drowned in icy water. The toll is catastrophic. Despite this, 7,000 soldiers, 2,000 officers, and members of Napoleon's Imperial Guard, marshals, and general staff managed to escape from the three Russian armies that vastly outnumbered them. Though Napoleon did not lose the battle, he ultimately lost the campaign. Over 600,000 people are either dead or captured. For the Russians, the Berezina is still a failure because they never captured Napoleon. The Battle of the Berezina is both a disaster and a victory for the French army. Thousands of French soldiers perish, but the survival of the heart of the Grande Armée, Napoleon's generals, officers, and key military staff is what matters most. It's an unfortunate thought, but that was the idea at the time. Despite the horror and the heavy losses, the battle at the Berezina is ultimately a victory. As Napoleon and Caulaincourt slip through the frozen wilderness heading westward toward France, the grim reality of the campaign's aftermath becomes undeniable. The path behind them is littered with the remnants of a once mighty army, shattered by frostbite, starvation, and relentless pursuit. Napoleon's mind remains fixed on the future, but the enormity of the losses weighs heavily on him, even as he clings to the belief that he can overcome any challenge. But as the remnants of the Grande Armée continue their agonizing retreat, the end of this chapter is far from certain. What awaits Napoleon in Paris and can he truly rebuild what from the ashes of his empire? The answers lie in the political turmoil brewing at home, a storm that will soon demand his attention. So this is the end of our episode for today, and we've seen how we're fascinated somehow by the strategic genius of building a decoy bridges to make the Russian army think that they're crossing at that point, but in the meantime they're building other structures further away in order to avoid defeat. But I also think that is the fruit of immediacy and desperation to find a solution to avoid being caught. But at what cost? How many thousands of people perished in the meantime? This is it for today. I will see you next time for episode 8. Thank you very much for following up. Bye.